There are days when it feels like your mind is no longer fully yours. You wake up, and before the day has even had a chance to become something real, your attention is already being pulled away. A screen, a thought, a worry, a habit, 100 small things asking for a piece of you. And by the time evening comes, the strange part is not just that you feel tired, it's that you feel scattered, like you were present for everything except your own life. That's why focus matters so much. Not in the shallow sense of getting more done, but in the deeper sense of becoming whole again. Because when attention is weak, everything starts weakening with it. Discipline becomes unstable. Clarity fades. Even simple decisions begin to feel heavier than they should. And slowly, without noticing, you start living in reaction instead of intention. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Do every act of your life as though it were the very last act of your life." There's something almost severe in that line, but also something deeply honest. It reminds you that attention is not a small thing. The way you think, what you dwell on, what you return to, what you allow into your inner world, all of that becomes your life over time. Not someday, not in theory, quietly, day by day. So this conversation is really about reclaiming something that should never have been handed away so easily. Your attention, your inner order, your ability to stay with what matters long enough for it to change you. Because once you begin guarding your mind with more seriousness, you're not just becoming more focused, you're rebuilding discipline, you're rebuilding clarity. In a strange way, you're rebuilding your life from the inside outward. And that changes more than productivity. It changes how you wake up, how you work, how you move through difficulty, how you respond to noise, how much of yourself remains intact by the end of the day. That's what these Stoic truths are really about. Not becoming perfect, not becoming robotic, but becoming harder to scatter, harder to weaken, harder to pull away from what you know matters. So let's start there with the first truth, because everything else rests on it. The first truth is this: guard your mind like a fortress, not in a fearful way. Not like you need to shut the world out completely, more like you finally understand that your attention is valuable and that not everything deserves access to it. Because once your mind is open to everything, it becomes harder to belong to yourself. A notification interrupts a clear thought. A few minutes of scrolling quietly steal the best part of your focus. One small distraction turns into another, and by the time you notice it, your energy is already scattered. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have been wandering. Now you must stop." That line feels almost painfully honest because it captures something simple and familiar. The mind wanders, it drifts, it gets pulled away. And discipline begins in that exact moment when you notice it and choose to come back. That is what guarding your mind really means. It means deciding that your inner world cannot remain available to every impulse, every noise, every random demand. It means creating boundaries strong enough to protect what matters. If the first moments of your day are given away to noise, the rest of the day often follows the same pattern. But when the day begins with silence, even briefly, something changes. You return to yourself before the world starts pulling at you. That can look very simple: leaving your phone alone for a while in the morning, writing down your real priority before anything distracts you from it, sitting in quiet long enough to hear your own thoughts clearly. None of this is dramatic, but that is exactly why it matters. Focus is rarely destroyed by one big event. It is usually weakened by small openings left unguarded. And it is not only external things that need boundaries. Some thoughts do too. Some mental habits keep returning only to weaken you, drain you, or scatter your attention. If a thought leaves you smaller every time it returns, it does not deserve a permanent place in your mind. It needs to be questioned, not fed. So this first step is simple, but it is not small. Treat your mind like something worth protecting. Protect the morning, protect your priorities, protect the quiet space where clear thought becomes possible. Because once your attention stops leaking into everything around you, discipline begins to return. And when discipline returns, life starts to feel like it belongs to you again. The second truth is this: cut away what weakens you. Discipline is not only built by adding better habits. A lot of the time, it grows by removal, by noticing what quietly drains your strength and having the honesty to reduce it. Not everything in your life is neutral. Some things sharpen you. Some things slowly wear you down. And if you never stop to tell the difference, your focus keeps getting weaker while you keep wondering why. Marcus Aurelius said, "If you seek tranquility, do less, or more accurately, do what's essential." That second part matters. It's not just about doing less for the sake of less. It's about stripping life down to what is real, useful, and aligned. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from hard work. It comes from clutter. Too many inputs, too many conversations that leave you heavy, too much entertainment that feels harmless in the moment but leaves your mind dull afterward. Too many small habits that make life noisier than it needs to be. This is where the Stoic approach feels almost like sculpture. You do not always become stronger by piling more things onto yourself. Sometimes strength appears when you start removing what should not have been there in the first place. A weak routine, a pointless argument, a compulsive check of the phone, a stream of content that gives you stimulation without giving you anything deeper. None of these things seem dramatic alone, but together they create a life where attention is constantly thinning out. There is a kind of courage in subtraction. It means admitting that some things you keep close are not helping you become who you say you want to be. Maybe it is a form of entertainment that leaves you restless. Maybe it is a rhythm of life that never gives your mind space to recover. Maybe it is being too available to people who always bring confusion, tension, or distraction into your day. Cutting away what weakens you is not harshness, it is self-respect. You can see this in the lives of people who became formidable by simplifying. Steve Jobs is an obvious example in one sense, but a deeper one might be someone like Agnes Martin, the painter. Her work became powerful not through excess, but through reduction, through clarity, through removing what was unnecessary until only what mattered remained. That same principle applies inwardly. Focus grows when noise is reduced. Discipline grows when what weakens you is no longer constantly fed. So this second step asks for honesty. Look at what leaves you mentally weaker after contact with it. Look at what steals energy without giving anything back. Look at what feels normal only because it has been repeated for too long. Then start cutting, not all at once, just deliberately. Because once what weakens you begins to fall away, something else becomes easier. Your mind has less to carry. Your attention stops being pulled in 10 directions. And the strength you are trying to build suddenly has room to appear. The third truth is this: master the power of single tasking. Your mind was not built to go deeply into 5 things at once. It can switch quickly, yes, but switching is not the same as focusing. Every time attention jumps, something is lost. A little energy, a little depth, a little clarity. And after enough of that, even simple work begins to feel strangely heavy. Seneca said, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." That line feels even sharper now than it probably did in his time, because the temptation to be everywhere is constant. One tab open becomes 6. One task turns into 3 half-finished things. You begin a piece of work, then answer a message, then check something small, then return to the original task already thinner than before. The body is still sitting there, but the mind has already been split into fragments. Single tasking is not just a productivity method, it is a kind of respect. It means giving one thing the full weight of your presence. It means deciding that this moment will not be shared with everything else trying to enter it. And there is something powerful that happens when you do that. Your energy gathers, the work becomes cleaner, time feels different. Even the mind itself becomes quieter because it is no longer trying to hold too many unfinished loops at once. You can feel the difference almost immediately. When you give one task your full attention, resistance often drops. Not because the task becomes easy, but because confusion fades. Scattered attention creates a special kind of fatigue. It makes you feel busy without feeling grounded, but depth has its own momentum. Once you stay with one thing long enough, the mind starts settling into it. What looked difficult at first often becomes more natural simply because you stopped interrupting yourself. This is one reason great work so often comes from people who protect long stretches of undivided attention. Toni Morrison wrote before dawn. Carl Jung built spaces of solitude around his thinking. Their genius did not come only from intelligence. It also came from guarding the conditions that allowed depth to happen. Real concentration has always required some refusal, a refusal to keep scattering yourself. So this truth is simple, but it asks a lot. Do one thing. Stay there. Let the mind go fully into it. Finish the paragraph before opening the message. Have the conversation without checking the screen. Sit with the work long enough for your deeper attention to arrive. Because once you stop teaching your mind to divide itself all day, it begins remembering what it feels like to be whole. And from that wholeness, stronger work becomes possible. The fourth truth is this: discipline your environment. It helps to be honest about something simple. Willpower is real, but it is not meant to fight every battle alone. If your surroundings constantly invite distraction, weaken your attention, and pull you toward the easiest version of yourself, then even strong intentions start losing energy. This is why discipline is never only internal, it is also physical. It is built into the shape of your day, the arrangement of your room, the distance between you and your distractions, the way your space either supports your better mind or quietly works against it. A chaotic environment does something subtle to the inner world. It fills the edges of attention with unfinished signals, a cluttered desk, a phone always within reach, too many open tabs, too many things half-started. Too many reminders of noise rather than purpose. None of this seems dramatic by itself, but together it creates a mental atmosphere that keeps you slightly scattered. And when the mind is already slightly scattered, focus becomes harder before the real work has even begun. The Stoics understood that environment shapes character more than people like to admit. Epictetus, in the line often attributed through later summaries of his teaching, reminds us to keep company with what calls forth our best. That principle goes beyond people. It applies to space, objects, rhythms, and routines. What surrounds you is always teaching you something. It is either training you toward order or pulling you toward drift. Think of how different the mind feels in two environments. In one, the phone is face down but still present. The room is visually noisy, there is no clear beginning to the work, and your body already feels half available to interruption. In the other, the space is simple, the task is visible, unnecessary things have been removed, and there is a quiet sense that this place has one purpose. The difference is not imaginary. The mind responds to structure. It relaxes into clarity when it is not constantly negotiating with distraction. This is one reason so many serious thinkers protected their physical surroundings with unusual care. Maya Angelou used rented hotel rooms to write, not because she needed luxury, but because she needed distance from the noise of ordinary life. There is something wise in that. She understood that environment is not decoration, it is part of the work. A room can either hold your attention in place or leak it away. And this does not require some perfect studio or ideal lifestyle. It starts smaller than that. Clearing your desk before you begin, keeping the phone in another room when the work matters, removing the easy pathways to distraction before your weaker moments arrive, leaving visual reminders of your purpose where your eyes naturally fall. Maybe a notebook open to the right page, maybe a single sentence that brings you back. Maybe the simple ritual of beginning at the same place at the same time until the environment itself starts telling the mind, we are here to focus now. There is also a deeper layer to this. Environment includes people. Some people leave you clearer, others leave you noisier. Some conversations lift your standards, others lower your state without you noticing until afterward. This is not about arrogance or withdrawal. It is about honesty. If certain company always pulls you away from your center, your discipline will keep paying the price for contact your soul does not fully agree to. So this fourth truth is less glamorous than it sounds, but deeply practical. Don't ask your attention to survive in places that constantly betray it. Build spaces that make the better version of you easier to access. Because once the environment stops working against your mind, discipline becomes less of a daily rescue mission. It starts becoming more natural, more stable, more available. And sometimes that is the difference between a life spent trying to focus and a life actually shaped by it. The fifth truth is this: train your attention with stillness. A lot of people think focus is built only through effort, through pushing harder, through forcing the mind to stay on track. But that is only part of it. Real focus also depends on something quieter. The ability to sit still without immediately reaching for stimulation. The ability to remain with your own mind without trying to escape it. The ability to come back to the present again and again until attention stops behaving like something wild and starts becoming something you can actually trust. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, freer of interruptions than your own soul." That line feels almost strange now, because for many people, the inner world is the very place they least want to stay. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unproductive. The moment there is emptiness, the hand reaches for the phone, the mind reaches for noise, the day fills the gap before anything deeper can rise, and yet that gap is exactly where strength begins. Stillness is not passivity, it is training. It is one of the most direct ways to show the mind that it does not have to chase every impulse, answer every distraction, or obey every restless signal. When you sit in silence for even a few minutes, when you breathe and let attention return to one point instead of 10, you begin noticing how scattered the mind has become. Not as a failure, just as a fact. And once that becomes visible, the work can begin. This is why stillness functions almost like a gym for attention. Each time the mind wanders and you bring it back, something is being strengthened. Each time you resist the urge to fill the silence instantly, something is being reclaimed. You're teaching the mind that it can stay, that it does not need constant novelty to remain alive. That peace is not emptiness, it is a form of order. There is a reason nearly every serious tradition discovered this in one form or another. Zen monks sat in stillness, not because nothing was happening, but because everything important was happening there. The Stoics returned to inner retreat for the same reason. They understood that if a person cannot sit quietly with themselves, then the world will always have an easy way of controlling their attention. A mind that fears stillness becomes dependent on stimulation. And a dependent mind is not a disciplined one. You can see this in ordinary life very clearly. If your attention has been trained only by noise, then simple tasks start feeling strangely difficult. Reading becomes harder. Reflection feels heavy. A few minutes of quiet work feel unbearable. Not because the task itself is so hard, but because the mind has lost tolerance for steadiness. It wants movement, interruption, novelty, little bursts of stimulation. Stillness reverses that training. Slowly, gently, but powerfully. Someone like Thich Nhat Hanh understood this deeply. His whole way of living pointed back to the idea that attention must be brought home through presence, breath, and deliberate slowness. He did not treat peace as some abstract ideal. He treated it as a practice of returning to the breath, returning to the body, returning to the step you are taking, the tea you are drinking, the moment you are actually in. That kind of presence is not separate from discipline. It is one of its roots. So this fifth truth asks for something very simple, but not always easy. Make room for stillness on purpose. Sit without stimulation for a few minutes. Breathe slowly enough for the nervous system to follow. Let the mind wander, then bring it back without violence. Walk without filling every step with content. Start learning what it feels like to exist without instantly consuming something. Because once attention is trained this way, focus stops being only a battle against distraction. It becomes a returning to yourself, a returning to the present, a returning to that quieter center beneath the noise, where clarity has been waiting much longer than you thought. And from there, discipline begins feeling less forced because the mind is no longer always running away from itself. The sixth truth is this: turn obstacles into focus fuel. It's easy to stay focused when things are smooth. When the work is clear, the mood is good, the body feels strong, and nothing is pushing back too hard. But that kind of focus is fragile. It depends too much on conditions behaving well. The deeper kind of focus, the one that actually rebuilds discipline, begins when something resists you and you choose not to scatter. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That line is powerful because it completely changes the role of difficulty. Instead of seeing frustration, delay, pain, or interruption as proof that you are off track, you begin to see them as part of the track itself. Not pleasant, not convenient, but useful. Something you can work with instead of something that instantly breaks your concentration. A lot of the time, the real damage is not caused by the obstacle. It is caused by what happens in the mind after the obstacle appears. You sit down to work and feel resistance, so your attention starts looking for escape. Something doesn't go as planned, and your energy turns into irritation instead of effort. A setback happens, and instead of tightening your focus, you lose shape completely. That is the moment this truth matters. Because an obstacle can either become a leak in your attention or a place where attention becomes stronger. The Stoics were so valuable here because they did not build their philosophy around ideal circumstances. They built it around friction, around reality as it is, around the fact that life will interrupt, oppose, delay, and wound. So the question was never, how do I avoid all difficulty? It was, how do I meet difficulty in a way that leaves me more disciplined rather than less? You can see this in the lives of people who learned how to convert pain into direction. Helen Keller is one of the clearest examples. What could have easily become a life defined only by limitation became something else because she learned through immense effort and guidance how to transform difficulty into force. Not because suffering automatically produces greatness. It does not. But because she did not let the obstacle remain only an obstacle. She made it part of the path, part of the formation of who she became. That same principle applies in smaller daily ways too. Frustration can become a trigger for distraction, or it can become a signal to go deeper. Fatigue can become an excuse to abandon yourself, or a moment to prove that your discipline is not completely dependent on comfort. A difficult conversation can either ruin your whole day internally or sharpen your understanding of what still controls you. In each case, The event matters, yes, but your use of the event matters more. This does not mean glorifying struggle or pretending every hard thing is secretly wonderful. Some obstacles are painful, unfair, or exhausting. But even then, there is still a difference between suffering and adding more weakness to the suffering. The Stoic move is to stop asking only, "Why is this in front of me?" and start asking, "What kind of mind will I bring to it now?" That question is where power begins returning. One practical way to live this is to catch the moment when your mind starts turning the obstacle into a story. This always happens fast. A delay becomes, "Now the day is ruined." A setback becomes, "I'm losing momentum." A mistake becomes, "I always do this." And suddenly the obstacle is no longer just external. It has multiplied inwardly. If you can interrupt that early, something changes. The problem becomes smaller, cleaner, more workable. You conserve energy that would have been wasted on emotional spillage. There is a kind of discipline that only appears under pressure. Calm during simplicity is easy to admire, but focus during friction is what actually changes a person. That is where attention becomes less romantic and more real. You stop treating discipline like a mood and begin treating it like a standard. So this sixth truth asks you to stop seeing obstacles only as interruptions. Sometimes they are the very material out of which stronger focus is built. They force you to return to the task with more seriousness. They expose how quickly the mind wants to run. They show you where your attention is still weak. And once that becomes visible, the obstacle is no longer just blocking you, it is teaching you. And that is the shift. The thing that stood in the way becomes the place where your discipline is tested, tightened, and deepened, not despite the resistance, but through it. The seventh truth is this: live by daily rituals, not random impulses. A lot of people try to build discipline through mood. They wait for the right kind of morning, the right burst of motivation, the right mental energy, and when it comes, they feel strong for a while, but when it fades, everything starts loosening again. That is why random effort feels intense but unstable. It has no structure to return to. It depends too much on how the moment feels. The Stoics were far less romantic than that. They understood that a strong life is not built on occasional intensity. It is built on rhythm, on repeated acts that shape the day before distraction has a chance to do it first. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do." There is something very grounded in that. It doesn't ask for inspiration. It asks for form, for order, for a way of living that keeps pulling you back toward your chosen self. That is what rituals do. They reduce the number of inner arguments. They spare you from having to reinvent your standards every morning. Instead of asking, "Will I focus today?" the ritual answers for you. Instead of waiting to feel clear, the ritual creates the conditions where clarity can happen. And over time, this matters more than people think. Because the mind gets tired not only from hard work, but from constant decision-making. Too many little choices, too many small negotiations. Rituals take some of that noise away. You can see this in the lives of people whose work required depth over long periods. Toni Morrison protected the early morning. Beethoven walked daily with almost ceremonial consistency. Twyla Tharp, in her own way, made creativity less mystical by giving it structure. These rituals weren't magical. That's exactly why they worked. They turned something fragile into something repeatable. And daily ritual does not have to mean some elaborate routine that takes 2 hours and belongs more on paper than in real life. It can be much simpler than that. Wake up and begin without touching the phone. Sit in silence for a few minutes before the day enters. Write down the one thing that matters most. Protect a specific block of time as sacred work time. Pause in the afternoon and ask where your attention has wandered. End the day by reviewing how you lived instead of collapsing into unconscious escape. Small things, yes, but small things repeated become atmosphere, and atmosphere becomes identity. This is where discipline starts feeling less like force and more like return. A ritual gives you a path back when you begin drifting. You don't have to solve yourself again each time. You just come back to the form. Come back to the page. Come back to the breath. Come back to the hour you promised to protect. In that sense, rituals are not rigid. They are merciful. They keep you from depending on your weakest moments to make your strongest decisions. There is also something deeply stabilizing about ending the day with review. The Stoics cared about this a great deal. Seneca would examine his day, not with self-hatred, but with seriousness. Where had he been carried away? Where had he remained steady? What could be corrected tomorrow? That kind of evening ritual quietly rebuilds character because it refuses to let the day pass unexamined. It turns experience into instruction. So this seventh truth is really about choosing rhythm over randomness. It is about giving your mind dependable structures to live inside, so that your life is not constantly being shaped by impulse. Because once your days are held together by deliberate rituals, attention stops feeling so fragile. Discipline has somewhere to live, and the person you are trying to become stops being just an intention in your head and starts becoming visible in the way your days are actually arranged. The eighth truth is this: control your inner dialogue. Not all distraction comes from the outside. Some of it lives much closer than that. It lives in the way you speak to yourself when something goes wrong, in the tone you use with yourself when you're tired, behind, embarrassed, discouraged, or uncertain. It lives in the repetition of old phrases that have been running through your mind so long they no longer sound like thoughts. They sound like facts. That's what makes inner dialogue so powerful. It doesn't only describe your experience, it shapes it. A difficult day becomes proof that you're failing. One mistake becomes evidence that you always fall apart. A setback becomes an identity. And once that voice gains enough authority, focus weakens from the inside, because it is hard to stay disciplined when the mind itself keeps turning effort into discouragement. Epictetus understood this better than most. He kept reminding his students that what disturbs us is not only what happens, but how we interpret what happens. That means your inner voice is never neutral. It is always assigning meaning. It is deciding whether this moment is training or humiliation, whether this obstacle is workable or overwhelming, whether your future is still open or already decided. That is why negative self-talk is so costly, not because it sounds unpleasant, but because it quietly steals strength. If the voice in your head keeps saying, "I'm behind, I always lose focus, I'm not built for this," what chance does your attention really have? The work has become heavier before you even begin it. Your energy has already been pulled into defense. And what makes this harder is that the inner voice often sounds familiar enough to be trusted. It may even sound honest, but honesty and cruelty are not the same thing. A mind can tell the truth without tearing itself apart. It can say, "I lost discipline here," without saying, "I am hopeless." It can say, "This is hard for me right now," without saying, "I am weak." That difference matters more than it seems. One form of speech keeps your dignity intact. The other erodes it sentence by sentence. You can see this in the lives of people who endured real difficulty without allowing the inner voice to become an enemy. Viktor Frankl is a strong example. In conditions designed to strip meaning from life itself, he kept returning to one decisive freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude. That choice was not abstract. It lived in inner language, in the refusal to let despair become the only interpretation available, in the refusal to let suffering speak the final word about what kind of person he still was. This doesn't mean talking to yourself in fake positivity. It means training your mind to become steadier, cleaner, more exact. Instead of saying, "I can't handle this," maybe the truer sentence is, "This is difficult." But difficulty is not the same as impossibility. Instead of saying, "I ruined everything," maybe it is, "I lost my footing here and I need to return." The point is not to sound inspiring. The point is to sound usable. To make your inner speech something your better self can actually stand on. Journaling can help here, not because writing solves everything, but because it slows the mind enough to let you hear what it is really saying. A lot of destructive inner language survives only because it stays vague and fast. Once it is written down, it becomes easier to challenge, easier to see, easier to replace with something stronger and more truthful. So this eighth truth is deeply practical. Listen to the way you speak to yourself. Notice what gets repeated. Notice which thoughts leave you clearer and which ones leave you diminished. And then begin shaping that voice with care. Because if the world is already noisy, the last thing you need is an inner life that keeps scattering you too. Once your inner dialogue becomes steadier, your focus changes with it. You recover faster. You stop collapsing over every small failure. You stay with the work longer, and gradually something begins to return. Trust in yourself. Not because everything is easy, but because the voice within you is no longer constantly working against you. The ninth truth is this: strengthen focus through the body. It's easy to talk about focus as if it belongs only to the mind, as if attention were some purely mental thing floating above the body. But you already know from experience that this isn't true. A tired body changes the quality of thought. A restless body makes concentration thinner. Poor sleep makes everything feel heavier. Hunger, overstimulation, exhaustion, shallow breathing, too much sitting, all of it touches the mind more than people like to admit. Seneca said, "We should treat the body rigorously, that it may not be disobedient to the mind." There's something sharp in that line, but also balanced. He did not mean worship the body. He meant do not let it become a source of disorder, because when the body is neglected, the mind keeps paying for it. Focus becomes harder to access, not because you lack discipline in some grand moral sense, but because the physical foundation under your attention has become unstable. You can feel this on ordinary days. When you sleep badly, small distractions feel louder. When you have not moved your body, your mind often becomes dull or agitated in a strange, low-grade way. When you eat in a way that leaves you heavy, your attention becomes less precise. Even your breathing changes the texture of your mind. Short, shallow breathing tends to invite fragmentation. Slower, deeper breathing often brings a little more order back. None of this is dramatic, but it matters. This is why Stoic discipline was never only abstract. It always had a physical side. Musonius Rufus believed that training the body helped train the will, not because the body was the ultimate thing, but because it offered a concrete field in which self-command could be practiced. Endurance, simplicity, moderate appetite, movement, these were not separate from philosophy. They were part of it. They taught the mind not to panic before discomfort, and not to become dependent on ease. There's a reason so many serious thinkers had strong physical habits. Haruki Murakami runs. Nietzsche walked for hours. Gandhi treated bodily discipline as inseparable from moral discipline. Different lives, different philosophies, but a shared understanding. The body affects the inner life in ways that cannot be ignored. They understood that physical care is not vanity when it is done in service of clarity. It becomes a form of respect toward the mind itself. And this truth becomes more obvious the older you get. You begin realizing that attention is not just protected by better ideas, it is protected by better rhythms, sleep that is taken seriously, food that supports steadiness rather than constant spikes and crashes, movement that clears stagnation, breath that interrupts emotional drift, a body that is not always in some low-level state of rebellion against the life you are asking the mind to live. That doesn't mean perfection, it means honesty. If your body is constantly depleted, overstimulated, under-rested and overfed with noise, then asking for deep focus on top of that becomes much harder than it needs to be. Not impossible, just harder. And some of what you call lack of discipline may actually be accumulated physical disorder. So this ninth truth is not about turning life into a rigid performance of health. It is simpler than that. Treat the body as an ally of the mind. Sleep like it matters, because it does. Move your body enough to wake your attention up. Eat in a way that makes clarity easier, not rarer. Use the breath to return when the mind begins scattering. Build physical rhythms that support the kind of inner life you say you want. Because once the body stops working against you, focus becomes less like a constant uphill fight. The mind settles more easily, energy becomes cleaner, and discipline, instead of feeling abstract and distant, starts feeling physically possible again. The 10th truth is this: live each day as if focus decides everything, because in a quiet way, it does. Not everything in life is under your control, but your attention shapes far more than it first seems. What you return to becomes stronger. What you dwell on begins organizing your inner world. What you allow to keep interrupting you slowly becomes your life's atmosphere. That is why focus is not just a work skill or a productivity technique. It is a daily philosophy. It is a way of deciding what deserves your mind and what does not. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." That line is not meant to create panic. It creates seriousness. It reminds you that tomorrow is not the place where discipline begins. Tomorrow is often just the name we give to today's avoidance. And if attention keeps being postponed into some future version of yourself that will finally be calmer, stronger, clearer, more ready, then life starts slipping by in delay. There is something powerful that happens when you stop treating focus like a temporary effort and start treating it like a form of respect toward your own existence. The day changes. You become less willing to waste your best hours on noise, less willing to hand your energy to things that leave nothing behind, less willing to live in fragments. Not because you become severe or joyless, but because you begin to feel the cost more clearly. You notice when your mind has been spent cheaply, and once you notice that enough times, something in you stops wanting to do it. This is what turns focus into character. You stop saying, "I'll be serious later." You stop imagining that your attention can be careless now and meaningful later. You start understanding that a life is built exactly this way, through repeated acts of concentration or repeated acts of neglect, through what you say yes to each morning, through what you protect, through what you allow to shape your interior world. You can see this kind of seriousness in the lives of people who created lasting work. James Baldwin wrote with an intensity that came from knowing life was too real to be lived lazily from the inside. Simone Weil treated attention almost like a sacred act, something close to prayer. Their lives were different, but both understood that how you attend to reality determines what kind of soul you are forming while you live. So this final truth is not asking you to become extreme. It is asking you to become intentional, to stop treating attention like something cheap and endlessly replaceable. To understand that when you focus, you are not only finishing tasks, you are shaping the quality of your days, the steadiness of your discipline, and the kind of person you become through repeated choices. And that leads naturally to the deeper conclusion. What the Stoics were really offering was not a trick for concentration. They were offering a way back to self-command, a way of living in which your mind is not constantly being entered, divided, weakened, and redirected by everything around you. A way of living in which attention becomes protected, deliberate, and aligned with what matters. Once that begins, discipline no longer feels like punishment. It begins feeling like structure, like relief, like your life becoming your own again. That is why focus matters so much. Not because it makes you efficient, but because it makes you less available to chaos, less available to drift, less available to becoming someone shaped entirely by distraction. When your attention is reclaimed, your discipline strengthens. When your discipline strengthens, your days stop collapsing so easily. And when your days stop collapsing so easily, your whole life starts taking on a different shape. So maybe the real invitation here is very simple. Start treating your mind like something worth protecting. Start treating your attention like one of the most important things you have. Protect the morning. Cut away what weakens you. Do one thing at a time. Let stillness strengthen you. Turn obstacles into training. Build rituals. Clean up the inner voice. Support the mind through the body, and stop waiting for some future day to become serious about the life you're already living. Because in the end, discipline is not rebuilt in one dramatic moment. It is rebuilt in the way you return. Return to what matters. Return to yourself. Return to the work. Return to clarity. Again and again, until what once felt difficult starts feeling natural. And once that happens, focus stops being something you try to have. It becomes part of who you are.